Hi, I'm Rick Kaufman, the Technical Marketing Engineer for the Technical Enablement Team here at Aruba Networks. This is episode 3 of the Aruba Restful Automation Series. Congratulations, you made it this far. In this episode, we are once again going to use Docker Desktop, and we're going to spin up not one but two Docker containers. We're going to link them together, and we're going to actually send information from a FLASK application in one and store that information in a Mongo database running in the other container. Now, we're going to look at this whole thing called CRUD, right? That stands for create, read, update, and delete records in the database. Now, we're going to have a little application that does that, and we're going to explore exactly how that works. So let's go ahead, jump into the lecture, and later on, we'll get to the lab and walk you through it. Thanks for joining again, and let's get started. Okay, we made it to the lecture part of the Aruba Restful Automation Series, episode 3. I call this Postal Ambitions because we're going to use the HTTP verb post to actually put some information on a remote system. We are going to have a conversation with that system, and that conversation is going to be wrapped up in JavaScript object notation or JSON. So we need to kind of understand what's going on with the whole JSON thing so we can have this conversation with the remote system. Now, luckily for us, JSON and Python data structures are almost identical, right? So we look for the square brackets. Anything that starts with a square bracket and ends with a square bracket is just a list of things. So it's thing one, thing two. They can be very complex things, but it's just a list of things nonetheless. Dictionaries, on the other hand, they have these curly braces and they're key value pairs. So I'll have a key called color and it's followed by the value orange. Now, this could be a value, could be a dictionary, or the value could be a list, and this can get very deep and complex fast. So we need to look for the road signs. And when we do this, we'll see that we have these square brackets, right? So it's just a list, switch, router, AP. But if we're looking for something in the second index and we see it's AP, we go, that's the third thing. Well, that's because lists start with 0. 0 is a number. So always keep that in mind. The first thing in a list is index 0. Now, dictionaries are key value pairs. They're just a bunch of key value pairs from curly brace to curly brace. And if we want to know the value of a very specific key, we can go to my dictionary hostname and discover the value is Bob. Okay, we're going to need to know some Mongo here, right? Because we're going to send information to a Mongo database that's running in some other container. And while we're doing our development work, we're going to want to be able to verify we're sending the right information to the Mongo database. So Mongo is a document database. The things that are in it are called documents, not records. I call them records all the time, and I have to correct myself, but they're documents. And they can be very complex things. So we have a lot of scalability and flexibility when we use Mongo. It's based on these key value pairs. And like I said, JSON and Python data structures are almost identical to Mongo, and that comes in pretty handy. I say almost identical. I have a hard time telling them apart when we're looking at them on the screen. So here is a Mongo document. I can see right now that this starts and ends with a curly brace. So that tells me that this must be a dictionary. And I'm looking for keys in the dictionary. I have a key here, address, and its value starts with a curly brace, ends with a curly brace. So it must be a dictionary. And if I look inside the dictionary, I can see one of the keys, coord, is a list because it starts and ends with a square bracket. Now, if I get down here to the grades key and I start looking at its value, I will see it starts and ends with a square bracket. So it's a list, and it turns out to be a list of dictionaries. Now, if I want to find a specific key inside this, I would have to know which index in the list I want and then which key in there. So if I'm looking for grade, I would have to write it like this. My dictionary grades 0 grade, and I would discover it has a value of A. So this can get really long. So it could be a list inside a dictionary, inside a list, inside a dictionary, inside a list, and it can go on and on. It can be very complex. So we look for these road signs to try to make sense of the madness. Now, we are running our little lab exercise in Docker infrastructure, so Docker desktop. And when we run Docker desktop, we're going to use the docker dash compose up dash d command to bring our infrastructure up. And then once we do that from the command line, we'll be able to look inside Docker desktop and I can see simple API is running and it has two containers. Now, if I want to get in the Mongo container, I just hover my mouse over that top entry and I will see these little icons pop up on the right. And the little symbol there that I have identified is the thing we're going to click on to get access to the Mongo client. Now, this terminal window is the terminal window for that container. So we can open that container up and be right on the command prompt inside that container. And this means that we can get access to the Mongo client simply by typing in Mongo sh-u-p are the options, that's username and password. And we can find that information inside the Docker Compose YAML file if we just take a look. So once we do that, and enter the username and password, we will be inside the Mongo client. Now, I promise this is going to be the shortest Mongo tutorial you could ever have, but this is Survival Mongo. This is just enough to let you see what's in the database and what you can do with it, okay? So on test, we're going to enter our first command called show DBs. Now, show DBs is just going to show us all the databases that are available for us. And when we run that command, and we don't see our DB demo 2, and I just ran my application, that means it didn't write a record to the database. I did something wrong. There's a problem somewhere. We'll only see a database pop up here if it has documents in it. I call them records again. See what I did? So we're looking for our database. It's demo 2. And now once we have demo 2 and we see it, we can switch to it. So I can say use demo 2 and Mongo will start using demo 2 for the database. Now, I could put use umbrella. It doesn't matter. Mongo just says okay. It doesn't care. You have to be very careful what you type here. So I'm typing it very carefully. I'm saying use demo 2 and I'm switched to demo 2. My prompt is demo 2. Now I can say show me the collections. And collections are kind of like tables, kind of, but they have a bunch of Mongo documents in them. So I can say show collections, and you see I have a collection named customer. Now that I know I have a collection called customer, I can start using that collection name with these Mongo commands. So if I say db dot collection name customer dot find, I'm going to see every record in the Mongo database. And I can see I have one record. And I can look at that record and say, wow, did the keys get written correctly with the right data? So if I write 100 records to there and I want to make sure I wrote 100 records, I can use the DB collection name customer dot count documents. Count has been depreciated. So we are going to use count documents here, and you can see I have one document. And then finally, if my application goes crazy or does something I didn't expect it to and starts writing data that I didn't want in my database, or in my collection rather, I can drop that collection from the database. And that's simply db dot collection name customer dot drop, and you'll see the word true there. Now that collection is completely blank and ready to go again. That's it. That's all I'm showing you on Mongo. We've got show DBs. We have use a DB, show collections, and then we have the DB find, the DB count documents, and the DB drop. That's as simple as I'm going to make it for you. That's all you really need to know to get started. Now, the demo, we're going to have Docker infrastructure here. So Docker desktop, we're going to have two Docker containers running. One container will be a MongoDB. The other container will be our web interface written in FLASK. And we're going to use container networking to connect these two containers together. And we're going to expose port 5001 so we can point our browser to localhost 5001. There's this simple API application that is basically a Flask application that runs in one container and the Mongo database in another container. That's here on my GitHub. And what we're going to do is, if we read through the README file, we can see that we've got to git clone the repo, change into the directory, and run docker compose upd, and our application is ready for us to consume. Let's give that a try. So if I come up to code, and I grab this, and I grab that, I copied the link, and now I'm in my op directory. You can see here, this is where we do all of our development, right? So we've got that going, so I'm in there, so I know where it's at, and I'm going to get clone that repo. And it's going to clone the repo, and if I do an ls maslia, excuse me, if I change directory into simple API, I'm going to say ls maslia here, and you can see these are the files that were in the simple API. Now, the instructions say to do a get clone, and it'll bring up the Docker infrastructure. That happens because over here in my editor, if I look at simple API, I have this Docker compose file that has two different services, web and Mongo, two different containers that get made, and I see that the username and password is here for the database. That's going to be a big help here when we get going. So we'll say docker -compose up-d, runs it in the background. So that goes out, finds all the stuff, builds the Docker infrastructure, and now I have a Mongo container and a web container both running in Docker. Now, if I ran over here to Docker desktop, we can see that that simple API is up and running. There are two containers, they're both green. The Mongo container, I can get into Mongo by clicking on that. We're going to do that here in a second. So we have everything going here for us. We're up, we're rolling. We know that it says it's on 5001. So if we open up a browser and we run over here to 5001 localhost, we're going to see we have an application running. So welcome to this API. Now it's a super simple create, read, update, delete Mongo application. You can redo this and make it work for anything, but we're going to add records, list records, edit records, and delete them. When we list records, you can see there's nothing in the database. So we're going to go over here, add a record. We're going to add a guy named Bob Johnson, and he's going to be over here at 111-999-555. And he is Bob at bob.com. Now we're going to use the post verb to push this to the Mongo container. So we're going to add that contact, and you can see on our home screen we have a record. So that's almost instant verification that we wrote to the Mongo database. But let's take a quick look at that and see what's going on over there. So if I jump in here, I can see that my Mongo's here. If I want to get in the Mongo container, I can just hit that little button, and we're going to blow this up, and we're going to get into the Mongo shell. -u was admin, we saw. -p was the super secret CS3, and we are at the Mongo prompt client. We're going to say show DBs for the databases. You can see we have demo2. We're going to say use demo2, right? Oh boy, that blew up. You must type correctly, right? So I'm going to say use, now I'm going to say this.
It just switched to that. It doesn't exist. Be careful on what you're typing here. That is a warning. So I'm going to say use demo 2, right? And if I say show the collections in demo 2, we're going to see our collection called customer. If I say db customer.find, it will list every document in the collection. There is our document. So it did right, and we logged into Mongo and verified that. Okay, moving along. Now let's go back to our application. Let's say we wanted to list them. So we could list them like this. We could search and sort with this JavaScript little table here. We wanted to edit the record. Editing is a multiple part thing. So you can see the first part of this, it's just asking me to pick a record. So I'm picking number 1. Now what I'm doing here, I'm using the edit contact that's sending a post, an HTTP post. It went in the database and got that record and it load record document, and it loaded those fields or those keys into this form. So this is the information from the database. I can change this to a 6. Now the other part of this, I'm posting again back to a different endpoint that's going to save this information into the database like that. So now you can see it's 5556. And then I can completely delete that contact here with the delete like that. And I select the thing I want to delete, and we delete the contact, and now we have no data in our database. Our database is empty. So let's take a quick peek at how all that happens. So if we look at the app, we jump in here. It's a FLASK app. We say it's a FLASK app. Here's our credential information here. Here is the connector to the DB. We call the DB demo 2. And every time we use the word DB, we're getting the connector to demo 2. So we're saying URL slash. This is URL manipulation. That's what we're talking about. Endpoints here. So if we see slash, we're just going to come to this welcome screen and send the home HTML. And we're going to put this message in that little bubble. Every time we come back to the home screen, we're not going to do that welcome message. We're going to go and look in the database for any records, and we're going to documents, and we're going to put them here in a page and send them on up with home1 HTML. Okay, and then we're going to keep moving. This is the CRUD part. So with the CRUD part, we're doing URL manipulation again, and this time we're saying slash add customer is the endpoint. And if we do that the first time through, it's a get method. So it's not going to hit this post method right here. It's going to run down to the bottom, and it's going to say add a customer right here. And what it does, it just brings up that web page with the customer form on it. We fill that out and we hit the submit button. Well, it comes back to the same endpoint and it does a post this time. So this time it does equal post, and it's going to come down here, form the record, and database collection, and it's going to insert the record. Listing just gathers them all up and lists them in a table here in the list customer HTML. That's the list endpoint. Edit endpoint is really the hardest one here, because we have to do so many things. Remember, we said the first time through post, we're going to come through, we're going to gather up the information from the database, and we're going to offer it in a pull down select menu. Well, when that gets selected, it's going to come up here as a post, and it's going to make sure that you actually selected something. So make sure it wasn't invalid, and if it's true, it goes ahead, figures out what entry you selected, and it will go out and it will go ahead and run this edit customer list. That's getting the information to the screen. And so once it gets there, we hit the button again is going to go to a different endpoint. It's going to come down here to the edit customer where it's going to pull the information off that screen, reformat that, and DB customer update 1 is right here. Here's where we're doing the update. So it's a multi-part thing. It's go find all the records, give them a number, and put them in a pull-down list. When I pull that list down and select it, it's going to go get that information and put it on the screen so I can change it. And after I make my changes, it'll do the edit customer complete endpoint and it will write it to the database. So the edit one's a little tricky, but it still works pretty good there. The delete customer is almost the same thing. You're going to see we rattle up all the entries, offer them up, and whatever one you select, we do a DB customer delete one. That's what's going on in this application. Okay. If we want to do other stuff like this, we cannot do that. Ah. Ah. As always, if you run into any problem, just take your error and Google it. I'm sure you'll find your way out of it. And make sure to join us in episode 4 of the Aruba Restful Automation Series when we cover HTTP authentication. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next episode.